Welcome to the Spirit of Mayberry, brought to you by Research Chief Spirit Walker from an undisclosed location deep within the bowels of the Andy Griffith Show Research Laboratory.
Today is Monday, November 7th, 2022. On Monday, November 7th, 1960, the sixth episode of the Andy Griffith Show aired, entitled Runaway Kid. Now, in that episode, Opie's friend, George Tex Foley, decided to run away from home and be his own man. My episode is entitled Runaway Kids, because I want to delve into some of the child stars on the Andy Griffith Show and what happened to them after they ran away from Mayberry, so to speak. What happened when the show ended? Where did these kids go? There are so many great actors on the show, and that includes kids. The kid actors on the show were fantastic. And it's interesting to note what happened to them and other things they did other than the Andy Griffith Show. I can't cover them all in one episode. There are just way too many. So I made a list of some of the kids that I wanted to cover in this very first episode on the kid actors of the Andy Griffith Show. I was fortunate enough to spend an hour and a half on the phone with one of them this past week, and he gave me some great insights to what it was like to be on the Andy Griffith Show when you're only 7, 8, 10, 12 years old. So let's get right to it by talking about the number one kid actor, of course, Ron Howard. Ron and Clint Howard published a book called The Boys that has just an amazing amount of information. Look how thick this book is about being a child star and about their parents. Of course, they had some great parents. Their parents, Rance and Jean Howard, were both actors. And so they got some great tips on acting at a very young age. And if you watch Opie, if you watch Ronnie Howard portraying Opie, he was 5 years old when the backdoor pilot on the Danny Thomas show aired. He was 5 years old. He had turned 6 by the time the Andy Griffith Show went on the air, but he was very young. But his acting, his comedy chops, his timing was just so perfect. The thing is that Rance and Gene never pushed their boys into acting. They were actors themselves, and the boys just saw it as a job. It was a job to them. They weren't anything special. They didn't act like they were anything special. They were very, very controlled kids in a great environment at home, and were able to go to work, do their job, and go home and be kids. And even a lot of times on the set, they were able to be kids. In fact, when Ron Howard was first cast as Opie, Rance Howard met with Sheldon Leonard, and he sat down and he said that he wanted Ronnie to have a normal childhood, as normal as possible. And what could the show and the producers do to make that happen? Sheldon Leonard said, we'll try to shoot around his schedule. When he has a basketball game or a baseball game, which Ronnie was an avid baseball fan, we would shoot around his schedule. And a lot of times when Ronnie wasn't in a scene, it was because he was doing something else. His schedule was different. Or when he wasn't in an episode, I'm talking about. So Ronnie Howard really was a child actor who didn't take acting as any more than just a job. In 1962, while filming the Andy Griffith Show, on the hiatus, he went and made my favorite musical, The Music Man, with Robert Preston. And Ronnie Howard was great in that show. And you could see because he played Winthrop Peru in that movie, and he had to have a lisp. And you can hear a little bit of it in the second season of the Andy Griffith Show when he came back from making that movie, when he says to Barney, "You ought to hear me sing a song," because he's missing a tooth, as Opie Taylor. He was delightful in that movie. He was a sought-after child star. He was on Dennis the Menace. and a couple of other shows. He played a little boy eating a candy bar in an episode of The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, which I know a lot of you probably never heard of it. It was one of my favorite shows when I was a young man, when I was a kid. The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis. By the way, Bob Denver played Maynard G. Krebs in The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, and he would play one episode of Tags as Dud Wash. But in the Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, Ron Howard played a little boy eating a candy bar. It's how he was billed. And it's ironic that his little brother would become known as the little boy eating the peanut butter and jelly sandwich as little Leon on the Andy Griffith Show. Now, Ron and Clint's parents raised them right, and they were always on a set somewhere. And Ronnie Howard was, of course, starring in the Andy Griffith Show, and his parents had to be on set. At least one of his parents had to be on set at all times, and Rance was usually there. And one day, Clint came in wearing a little cowboy hat and boots and his gun holsters and looking very cowboy-ish. And the director decided to put him in a scene. The first scene that Ron Howard was in, he was not called Leon. He did not have a name. In fact, he was just a little boy at this square dance, and he was standing there admiring the women. And all of a sudden, a man comes running over and snatches him up, covers his face with his hat, and runs off with him. Now, I do not believe this was a child abduction case. I believe that we are seeing his father. A lot of times people will say, little Clint Howard's character, Leon, just ran all over town, completely unsupervised. No, I believe we just saw his dad. I don't believe that it was anybody else. And by the way, you see on the internet that the actor who played the man who grabbed him and ran off with him was probably Martin Sheen. But as you can see, this is not Martin Sheen. In fact, the actor's name is Michael Jeffers. Michael Jeffers is a background actor, and you'll see him in quite a few episodes of the Andy Griffith Show. But that was Michael Jeffers who played, I believe, his father, who came and picked him up. I have little foibles like that. Like, for instance, I also believe that we see Floyd's wife in an episode, but you'll have to wait for the Andy Griffith Show or the Mayberry Rerun Watcher's Guide to Season 3 before I reveal that information to you. Just a little teaser. So in 5 episodes, Clint Howard was little Leon. Now in 1967, Clint Howard appeared in a movie called Gentle Giant, where he appeared as a little boy who adopted an orphaned bear cub. And that sprung him into the TV show Gentle Ben, where he was the main star playing Mark Wedlow, who adopted this bear cub. And he had to work with this huge bear named Bruno. And he has some interesting stories in his book about working with that bear and some of the things that happened between them. But he actually had his own TV show at the same time Ronnie was in the Andy Griffith Show, because Gentle Ben ran from 1967 to 1968. It ran 2 seasons, and it ran concurrently then with the last 2 seasons of Tags. And so there was a time when the Howard boys were flying high. They each had a top-rated TV show at the same time. Clint was in more than 250 TV shows and movies, and a lot of the films that Ron Howard then went on to direct had his family members in them. Now, Ron's acting credits were only, about 88, right around in there, TV shows and movies. But some of the notable ones, well, let me say this. In 1972, he starred in an episode of Love American Style. It was called Love and the Happy Days. In 1973, he made American Graffiti with Cindy Williams, who would become Shirley Feeney on Laverne and Shirley. Both of those things, Love and the Happy Days and American American Graffiti sprung Ron Howard into starring as Richie Cunningham in Happy Days. That was another hit TV show for Ronnie Howard. He did a great job there, and he got noticed, but he got noticed also because he was always watching the directors and the gaffers and the sound people and the lighting people. He was always watching the crew and learning what they do. But Ronnie Howard became a director, and the first movie he directed was Grand Theft Auto in 1977, the first full length movie. He directed like 3 shorts before that, but they were just basically like his home movies. But Grand Theft Auto, he starred in it. He co-wrote it with his father Rance, and he directed it, and that was his directorial debut. And the rest of it is movie history. But let's talk about his best friend now. Let's talk about the kid that played Opie's best friend, Johnny Paul Jason. That kid's name is Keith Thibodeau. Of course, at the time, he was billed as Richard Keith. Just a fantastic guy. I got to meet him at Mayberry Days last September. I had some great conversations with him. Just the nicest guy. He was billed as Richard Keith, but his real name is Keith Thibodeau. He was a professional drummer by the time he was 3 years old. He was an incredible drummer. And that's when Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz discovered him, because they were looking for somebody to play Little Ricky Ricardo on I Love Lucy. And the fact that he could play the drums and he looked enough like Desi Arnaz, he got the part. So at the age of 4 years old, he became Little Ricky Ricardo and just did an outstanding job. His first episode was Lucy and Bob Hope. Imagine that. He's 4 years old and he's on stage with 2 of the biggest stars in their day, Lucille Ball and Bob Hope. That must have been overwhelming. He played Little Ricky in 24 episodes. But then in 1962, on the episode One Punch Opie, Keith Thibodeau became a TAGS alumni. His first role was not Johnny Paul Jason. His first role was Carter French in One Punch Opie. That's the kid that he played, and he had very limited exposure as Carter French. So in the very next episode, and for 11 episodes thereafter, he became Johnny Paul Jason. Now you will see on IMDb.com and several other sites that he appeared as Johnny Paul Jason in 12 episodes. That is not true. He did not. The episode Man in a Hurry was the first one Johnny Paul was seen in. But as you can see, that kid is not Keith Thibodeau. This is Keith Thibodeau. See the difference? So who was the first Johnny Paul Jason? I want you to know that me and the boys in the lab are on this assignment. It is an open case. Who is the kid actor who played the first Johnny Paul Jason? It is open case number 1016295, and we are on the job. We'll let you know when there's an update. Now, Johnny Paul Jason, Keith Thibodeau, was one of Opie's best friends. He was a great actor. He did a fantastic job. And when the Andy Griffith Show ended, he joined a band called David and the Giants. It was a rock band, and they played. He was a great drummer, let's face it. But then in 1974, he gave his life to Christ, and he became a Christian, and he basically converted all the members of the band who had disbanded at that time, and they got back together and became a Christian rock band, also called David and the Giants. What a fitting name that is, right? He also married, and he became the executive director of Ballet Magnificat with his wife Kathy, and they have been doing that all over the country. They're still doing that to this day. David and the Giants recorded their last live album in 2017 after celebrating 40 years of being together as a Christian rock band. Isn't that incredible? That's really good. Now you can go and buy his book, Life After Lucy. I suggest that you do that. It was published in 1994. It might be a little hard to find, but find Life After Lucy by Keith Thibodeau. Another prominent child actor on the show was Ronnie Dapo. Now, Ronnie played one of the characters that a lot of people didn't like too much, but his character has redeeming qualities. I'm going to explain that to you. His first role was on a TV show, U.S. Marshal, at age 7. He also was in The Music Man with Ron Howard in 1962. And a year later, he became Arnold Winkler, is the spoiled kid. Remember the kid, I want my bike? That was Ronnie Dapo. Ronnie gets a bad rap for being that spoiled little kid, right? But in the next episode he was in is an all-time favorite of Tag's fans, The Haunted House. When he was in the Haunted House episode, he wasn't called Arnold Winkler. My third law of Mayberry dynamics say that any character or any actor who plays a character is that character until acted upon by an outside force, meaning another writer. And so since he was Arnold Winkler in the Spoiled Kid episode, in the Haunted House, when he wasn't named, he was still Arnold Winkler. I like to see him as a reformed, spoiled kid. He is now a kid playing baseball with Opie outside the haunted house, hits his ball into the window, and the rest of it is just TV magic. It is great. He also was in one other episode when he played Pete in the episode of Baby in the House, which is a colored episode, and you've probably never seen it, but you should. He retired from acting at the age of 14, and he toured as a musician after that for a long time. Then he also ran a printing press and a steel press frame, and then he retired finally at the age of 60. You see, it was hard for a child actor to become an adult actor. Very difficult, very difficult. Ronnie Dapo went the way of most child actors. He never quite made it as an adult actor, but he did have a fine life, and he retired at the age 60 and is still alive to this day. Joy Ellison. I love little Joy Ellison. Joy Ellison was just a cute little 7-year-old girl when she first made her appearance on the Andy Griffith Show, which was her very first acting job. She played little Effie Muggins in an all-time favorite episode, The Christmas Story. She played little Effie, whose father was arrested on Christmas Eve, and they spent Christmas Day in the jail. And it was just it's a great, very touching and very well done Christmas episode. Number 1 on my list of all Christmas episodes of TV shows. A few episodes later, she was Mary Wiggins, who was Opie's very first on-screen girlfriend. Now, Opie had a girlfriend named Charlotte in the Horse Trader episode. No, in Opie's Charity episode. In Opie's Charity episode, he had a girlfriend named Charlotte, but she was never seen. So Mary Wiggins became, in the beauty pageant episode, became the very first on-screen girlfriend of Opie Taylor. She then played Mary Scobie as in Andy Forecloses. She played Mary Scobie. Then she went on to play in the color episodes a girl named Betsy and a girl named Iris. She had a very successful career. However, she had an even more successful career after she retired from acting and became a dialect coach. She's been involved in more than 80 productions as a dialect coach, and she's one of the most sought after today dialect coaches. She's at Mayberry Days every now and then herself, along with Margaret Carey, by the way, who played her mother in 2 of those episodes. But this last guy that I want to talk about, I spent an hour and a half on the phone with. He's just the most delightful young man. I say young man. He was a young man on the show, but none of us are as young as we used to be. Correct? He was he was another one of Ronnie Howard, Opie Taylor's best friends. His name is Dennis Rush, and he played Howie Pruitt. Um, Howie was one of my favorite kid actors. In fact, I told him one of the things that I remember from a kid, a line from a kid on the show came from Howie Pruitt, and I'll tell you about that in just a minute. Let me tell you first of all about Dennis Rush. Dennis Rush. By the way, I told him it was a rush to talk to Dennis Rush on the phone. Dennis is just a nice guy. He was born in 1951. Now you're going to see on IMDb, Wikipedia, other places that he was born in 1952. He was actually born from his mouth March 10th, 1951. So that's one piece of information we can correct about Dennis Rush. He was in 8 episodes. 7 of them he was Howie Pruitt. Now, I'll tell you about the 8th in just a minute. It's a funny story. He got his start on a movie called The Man of a Thousand Faces, and I love the subject matter of The Man of a Thousand Faces. Lon Chaney and Lon Chaney Jr. Lon Chaney Jr., especially as I remember growing up, was the Man of a Thousand Faces. He was in horror movies all over the place. He played the Wolfman, and he played Dracula, and he played the Mummy, and just all kind of scary people. In 1957, they made a documentary about Lon Chaney and Lon Chaney Jr., and it was called The Man of a Thousand Faces. And little Dennis Rush, at the age of 4 years old, played the 5-year-old Lon Chaney Jr. in that movie, as it followed Lon Chaney Jr.'s life up through from the time he was a child. And Dennis played the first version of him. And he told me this great story about how he got his very first acting lesson at the age of 4 years old on the set of The Man of a Thousand Faces, and it was by none other than James Cagney. Can you imagine that you're getting your first acting lesson from a legend like James Cagney? James Cagney pulled him aside in a scene where little Dennis had to cry because he was losing his parents and was about to become an orphan. And James Cagney pulled him aside and explained to him that this little boy that you're playing, your character, is never going to see his parents again. He's never going to be able to play with his siblings again. And Dennis said he started crying right there. And when he started crying at the thought of this kid losing everything, James Cagney turned to the director and said, "He's ready." And they shot the scene. That was his first introduction to acting. And I thought that was a great story. He also told me that he was just used to, being with other acting kids in school. He recalled doing episodes of Wagon Train in which the schoolroom for the kids, he did 7 episodes of Wagon Train, and the schoolroom for the kids was behind the wagons. So when next time you watch an old episode of Wagon Train, know that there's kids going to school in a tent behind the wagons that are lined up there in the convoy going across the West. He said that they would have school back there behind the wagons, and they could hear everything that was going on the set while they're trying to do school. He said going to school with other celebrity kids was just normal to him. And so the conversation on the playground might be, "Hey, have you done anything lately?" "Yeah, I was in an episode of Wagon Train." "Yeah, I was in an episode of Lassie." "Yeah, I was in "Oh, that's cool. Hey, let's play ball." And they would just go on and they would talk about baseball and whatever. Ronnie Howard loved to talk about baseball more than he loved to talk about acting. Work was work and school was school. That's the way these kids grew up. When they were on the set, it wasn't a glamour position. It was work. That was their job. They would go, they would do their job, and then they would go to school. Talking about school, Dennis told me that one day when he was shooting a scene in The Virginian, And he said, I only had a very short, little, small part. I only had to run in and tell the sheriff the bad guys were coming. And he said, it was a very quick, easy scene, but they couldn't get to me. I was on the set of the Virginian for 14 days. 13 of those days, all I did was go to school. See, they would show up on the set because that's where their school was. And on the call sheets that you see, I have a call sheet from an episode of the Andy Griffith Show I was looking at, and it said Ron Howard was to show up at 9 a.m., and the welfare worker was also scheduled to show up at 9 a.m. And the only thing Ron Howard had to do that day, because it listed all the actors and where they were to report and what scenes they were going to shoot, his only said school. So on that day, Ron Howard showed up at the Andy Griffith Show, and all he did was go to school. And Dennis was talking about doing that for 13 straight days while trying to film one scene of the Virginian. Before they got to him, they kept putting it off for one thing or another. And eventually they finally got to him. In 1963, Andy discovered America. It was one of my favorite episodes. I love that episode. And in that episode, well, first of all, that was Dennis's first episode with the Andy Griffith Show. In that episode, him, Johnny Paul Jason, played by Keith Thibodeau, and Ronnie Howard were the trio. They were the main three kid actors. There were other kids in the scenes, but they were the three main ones. They were out front, and it was his first time. And he said, "Imagine me showing up at the Andy Griffith Show to work with two of the biggest child stars of my day. Ronnie Howard and Keith Thibodeau were the two big dogs. Little Ricky and Opie Taylor, are you kidding me? That was magic." He said, "I couldn't wait to get there. And then to work with them and find out that they are the nicest guys in the world and so easy to get along with and such a joy to work with was amazing." He said, "The Andy Griffith Show was different than any show I ever worked on. The atmosphere was so agreeable and so nice and just so accommodating." He said most of the time, and by the way, this little insight into the Andy Griffith Show, he said they shot each scene 3 times. The first was a master shot where they shot it in wide frame, so you see all the participants of the scene in that master shot. Then they would shoot individual close-up scenes, Andy doing his lines and reactions, the kids doing their lines and reactions. They would shoot the individual shots, but they would shoot. You were going to be there in at least 3 scenes, or 3 takes of that same scene. He said most of the time when they do a close-up shot, a reaction shot, the person you hear in reality is not the person you hear on the screen, because in reality, Andy's doing the talking and he's telling the story. Well, the master shot is what you hear. That's the soundtrack. And so you hear the voice of Andy talking, but usually it's just somebody, a stagehand, reading the lines, a script supervisor, I should say, reading the lines to the boys. So they'll read what Andy says and the boys will react. And then they'll read the next line Andy says and the boys will react, that kind of thing. And so the actor doesn't have to be there. He can be taking a smoke break or something like that. But in this case, he said Andy insisted that he be the ones to tell the boys the story live. Even though they didn't record him saying it, he was saying it to the boys so that he would get a real reaction from the boys. He said he never saw that before, and it was incredible to him that Andy took such good care and worked so closely with the kid actors. In 1964, he did an episode called "A Deal is a Deal," where he got an acting lesson from the other giant in the on the Andy Griffith Show in the industry, and that was Don Knotts. This is where my favorite line comes in from a kid star. In "A Deal is a Deal," remember, they're selling Miracle Salve, and they're having a hard time selling it. Well, one of the boys gets blacklisted. And so all the boys are trying to figure out, what does it mean to be blacklisted? So they run to the courthouse to ask Andy, but Andy's not there, but Barney is, and he's sleeping. And they wake him up and they say, hey, Trey's been blacklisted. Trey Bowden, by the way. Um, he's been blacklisted. What do we do? What does that mean? And so Barney thinks for a little while and he says, well, it means you can't get a job. And then he goes on to say, um, I got it. I got it. How do you fight fire? And Dennis Rush's character, Howie Pruitt, says, with a hose? And Barney says, no, you fight fire with fire. And then he explains that he's going to try to trick the Miracle Salve people into taking the jars of salve back from the boys. And Howie says, I don't think this fighting fire with fire is going to work. And then Andy comes in, and Barney runs over to Andy and says, Andy, how do you fight fire? And Andy says, with a hose? Then comes my favorite line. Howie looks at Barney and goes, I told you, Barney. It just cracked me up the day I heard it. And to this day, if somebody disagrees with me on a subject, and then we ask somebody else and they agree with me, I will turn to that person and say, I told you, Barney. They never get it, but it still cracks me up. I love that line. I told you, Barney. Now, Dennis revealed to me that was his first acting lesson from Don Knotts. Don Knotts, when he first did the scene, Don didn't think that Dennis was putting everything into it. And he said, you've got to be more sharp with me. You've got to really hit me with that line. This is what Don Knotts told Dennis. He said, you got to hit me with that line. And Dennis said, I've always been taught to be respectful to adults. I didn't want to be disrespectful. And Don Knotts said, you're not being disrespectful to me as Don Knotts. It is a kid on the show whose character is hitting Barney Fife. Okay, it's not real life. You have to put that out of your mind and get into the acting, because if you are acting your best, you're going to make me act my best. He said, if we're dancing, I can't react unless you step on my toes. And so Dennis went in there and hit him with, I told you, Barney, as hard as he could. How about that? James Cagney and Don Knotts are giving you acting lessons. That would be fantastic, wouldn't it? So I had to ask Dennis, why did they change your name to Williams in the last episode? I said he was in 8, he was 7 as Howie Pruitt. All of a sudden, in his last episode, he is Howie Williams. Why did that happen? I asked Dennis. Dennis said, I remember when we got the script from the Andy Griffith Show. He said, I remember sitting on the couch with my mom. We would get the script in the mail. My mom would sit on the couch with me, and we would go through the script, and she would explain each scene. She would explain the scenes I was in and the kind of attitude that I should have in that scene, and we would go through the lines, and that was a routine. That's what we did. And when we got the script for the Andy Griffith Show, this was in the colored episode. When we got the script for the Andy Griffith Show, we were so excited that I got to be back on the Andy Griffith Show. He said, I looked at the script and I noticed that it was Howie Williams. And I told my mom, I said, Mom, they've changed my last name. And he said his mother's advice to him was, shh, don't say anything. Just be thankful you got a job. Isn't that, Eric? That's great advice. Great advice from an acting parent. Don't criticize, don't bite the hand that feeds you. Be thankful you got the job on the Andy Griffith Show, because everybody wanted to get on the Andy Griffith Show. His last movie was Follow Me, Boys. And he told me that he loved that movie because when he got on the set, he found out that he was part of a kid ensemble with Ronnie Dapo and David Bailey. Now, Ronnie Dapo, we've already talked about. David Bailey, I've mentioned, he's the one that played Trey Bowden. And he said it was like an alumni meeting of kid actors from the Andy Griffith Show. He said it was the Tags connection. So anytime I could do a program where I had a tags connection, I was happy. Well, Dennis's acting ended when he retired at the age of 14, or as he told me, I didn't retire, they retired me. He went the way of most child actors, but he did not fade away into oblivion. He became a Marine, the United States Marines. In fact, he was stationed in North Carolina for a short period of time, but he was also stationed in Hawaii. He was the casualty clerk at that time, which means he got to report on all the casualties that were suffered during the Vietnam War, and also POWs and things like that. In fact, when Senator, not then Senator, then he was just a lieutenant commander in the Navy, John McCain III was captured as a POW, and when he was captured, his father, John McCain Jr., was the commander in chief of the Pacific Command stationed in Hawaii. And it was Dennis's job to report on John McCain III after John McCain Jr.'s son was captured. He had to give him updates on his POW status, even if it was no further news, sir. So he served his country well, and he was a credit, I'm sure, to the Marine Corps and to the United States of America. He retired, or he only spent a couple of years in the Marines, and then he went into private business, and he managed hotel restaurants for a long time, and he just recently retired. And he's a great guy. I guarantee you, he is just a great guy. Loves the Andy Griffith Show and is amazed at you. He said he's amazed at you, that you, after 62 years, are still following the Andy Griffith Show. He's amazed and grateful. So here are some child actors who did well, and when they ran away from the Andy Griffith Show, they did not run away. They walked away sadly because it was the greatest time of their life. Hey, do me a favor, subscribe and like this channel. It's the only way I get any kind of encouragement. So like and subscribe, give me a comment. I thank you. Good night.